And shine everybody did this morning, starting with the historic signing of that U.S.-Canada-Mexico deal. And it's the modernized version of the North American Free Trade Agreement. President Trump first to speak at the signing ceremony, acknowledging the sometimes very tough rhetoric thrown back and forth during months of negotiations between him, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto. Listen.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who has also become a great friend. This has been a battle. And battles sometimes make great friendships, so it's really terrific.
And he called it a great friendship. And when you look at what really had happened before then, boy, there were some real barbs being thrown back and forth. This included a crowd watching. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin had a big smile on his face. I watched him walk in. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Jared and Ivanka Trump. President Trump said, quote, after a lot of abuse and barbs, this agreement was, quote, worth it. So let's bring in one of the negotiators in a Fox Business exclusive of the original NAFTA, Ambassador Charles Ries. Ambassador, welcome. And I'd begin by asking you, just how different is this new modernized NAFTA deal than what you put together 24 years ago with President George Herbert Walker Bush?
Well, Liz, it's a little bit different, largely because of the passage of time. There are elements that came really out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, coverage for digital trade, better coverage for drugs and intellectual property, things that you would have done if you had just sat down to modernize the NAFTA. The big change between this and the agreement that we did in '94 is in the auto sector, where there are higher rules of origin, and there is a provision requiring some proportion of the content of autos and trucks to come from high wage, more than $16 an hour labor. But most of the rest of the agreement, including the agricultural provisions that are really, really important for the U.S. farm sector, is pretty much the same.
Well, the perception, I'm sure they all wanted, was that they were selling it to each of their countries this morning as a victory. Although I would have to say that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau seemed to be the least excited about it. And here's what he said. I want you to then react to Justin Trudeau.
There's much more work to do. We need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our countries.
What about that, Ambassador?
Well, I can very much.
Will there be a quick move?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, this was the moment for the generosity of spirit to lift the steel and aluminum tariffs, which were put on a national security basis. And the Canadians have taken this very badly. They are one of our longest and oldest allies, and they have this long land border, peaceful land border with us, and they find it sort of personally or sort of nationally offensive that we restrict steel and aluminum imports on national security grounds. And I think they had hoped that in the end game, before the signature, they could have gotten that relief, but they could not.
I need to talk about what happens next. This is still a moving target. All three countries have to have this ratified by their legislative bodies. Now, Congress has to look at it, but there are a bunch of other issues that have to happen ahead of that, including, I guess the president has, about 60 days to report to Congress the changes in the U.S. law, and then there's about a 105-day agreement within the 105 days where the Trade Commission has to talk about the impact on the U.S. economy. But then it goes to Congress, and we have a new Congress here. We have a Democratic-controlled House, and I'm not so sure that anybody's as worried about that as maybe some of the Senate members. You know, Robert Lighthizer had spoken to the press after, and he told us he was most animated, let me just say that, when he was asked about whether Democrats would be fighting this. And he said, we want Democrats happy on this, and this has been a bipartisan deal from the start. So I'll tell you something. You look at what that tone is, and now you see that in the past hour or so, Senator Marco Rubio is tweeting that he hates this deal. He thinks it's terrible. And he is on the same side, in a way, as Senator Liz Warren. Who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? Well, I think the first thing, the most important thing about this whole process that we have in the future is that the existing NAFTA stays in effect. The biggest risk that we had was that for some reason or another, these negotiations would fail and the NAFTA would, the president would pull the United States out of NAFTA on 6 months' notice. And that would have been a little bit like Brexit, a cliff edge that would have been devastating for business, for the stock market, and so forth. We're not there. So we have the next steps are part of what used to be jokingly called fast track, which isn't all that fast. But if these procedural steps are made,
right.
what happens is that the administration gets a straight up or down vote on the agreement without the possibility of amendments. And it may take really quite some time. There is no time limit on Congress itself in doing that up or down vote. And the administration will try to build a bipartisan coalition in favor of this. There are Republicans who will be doubtful of its more restrictive aspects, and there will be Democrats that will be enthusiastic about the provisions in auto trade, which seem to benefit the labor unions. We'll have to see how it plays out politically. I think that the Democrats will be fundamentally a little reluctant to give the president something that he can claim as a big trade victory, especially with all the other trade disputes out there.